Today we're here to talk about the need for restoration of civility in New York State. Our children are about to return to college campuses. School starts not more than a week or two from now. We saw what happened at the end of last year with protests on college campuses. There are bills that are sitting in Albany right now that would address issues of, frankly, violent behavior on college campuses, violent acts of anti-Semitism on college campuses, and the fact that time and again administrators in our university systems, whether it's CUNY, SUNY, or private colleges, have done very little, if anything, to combat that. Right here in New York State, we have the opportunity to set the bar. We have a great example here in Nassau County. Just a couple of days ago, the county legislature passed a bill, again, outlawing the wearing of masks in public in New York, at least here in Nassau County. For purposes of clarity, there had been a law on the books in New York State, statewide, that would prohibit masks for over 170 years prior to 2021, when that bill was and that law was repealed. There is no reason why we should be encouraging criminals to wear masks in public and continue to use masks and the screening of their identity as a means of continuing to commit violent criminal acts. It's common sense, and it's time we put common sense first. They did it here in Nassau County, and we call on the governor and our colleagues in Albany to pass a law that again restores mask bans in New York State. Now, it's very simple. As the father of 4 daughters, I do not want my kids coming off a train at a train station, walking down a street anywhere, whether it's here in Mineola, in New York City, or anywhere in New York State, and have to be confronted with people wearing masks. Now, let's be clear. We're not talking about people wearing masks for medical reasons. We're not talking about people wearing masks for cultural and religious reasons. We're talking about people wearing masks because they want to hide their identity, and the only reason that they would want to hide their identity is that they do not want to be identified when they commit crimes in this state. So let's restore civility. Let's restore law and order, and let's think about this. Almost every state in this country has a mask ban, and they're there for a reason. So let's prioritize safety, law and order over lawlessness, hate, and an excuse to continue to protest and attack, whether they are Jews in college campuses. There's an increase in crime and harassment against the Jewish community. Whether it's Asian Americans, there is an increase in crime and instances of hate against Asian Americans. People need to be identified. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave you with one point. If you were to take your car, remove your license plate, and drive around, you'd be stopped almost immediately. Your license plate is there so that you can be identified in the event that you do something wrong. It's the same reason we want people to be identified, by not allowing them to indiscriminately cover themselves and cover their faces, whether they are committing crimes, committing unlawful acts while protesting. There has to be civility restored, and this is one great way to do it. So I'm happy to be here with some colleagues. I will introduce my colleague, Steve Rhoads. Senator Rhoads represents the district immediately to the east of here. Senator Rhoads introduced a bill, Senate 9194, specifically on the issue of masks, and he didn't do it last week, he didn't do it this week, he did it back in May. So this is something that has been on the books. It has been a request. We've asked the governor to consider it. We've asked our colleagues to consider it. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Steve Rhoads to talk about the need for a anti-mask bill in New York State and the importance in keeping our families safe. Steve?
Thank you, Senator Martins. We are talking about common sense today. And unfortunately, common sense is something that is sorely lacking when we take a look at what happens in New York State. We are here having this press conference in Nassau County, a county which last week was named the safest county in the United States. And again, Nassau County is taking the lead by putting in place a common sense mask ban mirrored after New York state law that existed since 1845. And the bill that I introduced back in May, and incidentally, a bill which I would anticipate that the governor would support because the governor came out in June, a month after the bill was introduced, of course, right after the close of session, to announce how we need to do something to put a mask policy back in place in the state of New York. That was 2 months ago. And what's happened in the interim? Nothing. After she had that press conference, I sent a letter to the governor saying, hey, by the way, just in case you didn't happen to notice, we introduced Bill 9194, which would reintroduce the same exact law, word for word, that was on the books here in the state of New York for 175 years. The same law, by the way, that was originally introduced because of farm protests, anonymous people who were attacking our police because they were trying to conceal their identity. The same law, by the way, that was used to thwart organizations like the Ku Klux Klan, who are committing violent acts of terror against a segment of our society. That's the law that we're looking to put back in place. Never received a response from the governor. Could have called a special session at any point in time during this entire summer in anticipation of what we expect will happen, hope will not, but expect will happen when campuses return to session and we start to see these protests again. So what we're doing today is calling for common sense, recognizing the leadership that Nassau County has shown by instituting a mask ban, a common sense policy not to thwart protest, but to ensure that when there are protests, that those protests do not turn violent. Because the reason for wearing a mask when you are engaging in a protest is not because you're concerned about your health. It's because you are trying to conceal your identity so that you cannot be identified when something turns violent. When, as happened at Columbia University, when all of a sudden the peaceful protest, I'm using air quotes for that, the peaceful protest all of a sudden turned into acts of violence, trying to take over Hamilton Hall, successfully taking over Hamilton Hall. And it's not just about college protests. For example, you had right at Hofstra University, not more than a few miles from where we're standing right now, outside of a high school graduation, 6 masked individuals actually shot 2 people attending that graduation. This is a law enforcement issue. It's about the police's ability to identify, and even for a victim, when we're talking about, for example, a masked individual attacking and harassing people on a subway in New York City, as occurred back in June. It's about victims being able to identify who their attackers are. So this is not just an anti-Semitism issue, which it clearly is. And unmasking hate is not just about the Jewish community. Unfortunately, there is no shortage of hate with respect to a variety of communities here in this country. It's about making sure that both victims and law enforcement have the tools that they need to be able to hold people who commit crimes of hate, to hold people accountable when they commit criminal acts. And so again, we are calling on the governor to call a special session of the legislature before campus comes back into session, colleges come back into session, to make sure that law enforcement and the people of the state of New York who rely upon us to keep them safe, that they have the tools that are necessary to be able to help them do that. And I want to thank Jack Martins for his leadership on this issue, and as the chair of the New York Senate Republican Committee on Anti-Semitism, for his leadership, not just with respect to the mask bill, but with respect to a variety of common sense proposals which Republicans have introduced, which are sitting in committee, that the one-party rule up in Albany between the governor and Albany Democrats in the Senate and the Assembly have refused to move. It's not a shortage of solutions. It's a shortage of common sense, wisdom, and political will to move those solutions forward. And we are calling on the governor to show leadership, not just with words, but with concrete action, by calling a special session of the legislature and forcing these issues like S9194 to be brought to the fore and brought to the floor for a vote. And at this time, to speak a little bit more about law enforcement here in Nassau County and about the use of bills like 9194 as a tool for law enforcement, I am pleased to have our First Deputy Commissioner of the Nassau County Police Department, that is Kevin Smith.
Thank you, sir. Well, first of all, I want to thank both senators for their efforts to get this done. But let me say this, and I think you've heard it before just a few seconds ago. Nassau County has been deemed to be one of the safest counties in which to live for several years in a row. We and our other law enforcement partners here in Nassau County have been able to drive crime down year after year. Those who pursue that criminal lifestyle are always cooking up new ideas, and we relentlessly adapt to those techniques, their techniques, with a great deal of resolve and pain to put them out of business. So County Executive Blakeman has been very supportive of the police department, your police department, our police department, and on your behalf, he has made public safety a priority. The Mask Reform Act helps us identify persons who are engaged in suspicious or criminal activity. Masks have long been associated with the process of concealing one's identity from responsibility, to hide from responsibility, and to avoid consequences. That being said, it takes help. It takes help from lawmakers to adjust to the times. We constantly hear from victims, what about my rights? Shouldn't we aim to make the victims a priority? I think that's what we should do. But let me just make one thing clear, and I think it was said already. When your intent is to conceal your identity via a mask and to engage in suspicious or criminal activity, this law will assist law enforcement in doing our job, which is to protect life and to protect property. The law basically says, wear a mask to conceal your identity, and you're going to have a problem, because we're going to be looking at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well said. The other bill we're here to talk about, and I mentioned it earlier, has to do with college campuses and accountability and responsibility for administrators on college campuses. So whether it's CUNY Chancellor Felix Rodriguez or SUNY Chancellor John King, or Cornell, Columbia, NYU, universities, private universities that receive tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, of funds from New York State. They're given special tax status with regard to their ability to pay and their requirements to pay taxes, not only to the city, but the state of New York. They have to be held accountable. And the only way we find that we can actually hold them accountable is to hit them where they hurt the most, which is in our funding of their systems. There's a bill that was proposed by Senator Canzoneri Fitzpatrick, Senate 7773, that would do just that. It would require training not only for administrators, but for professors and students on college campuses, so that these instances of anti-Semitism and hate in general, one, are countered, two, when they do occur, that they're held accountable, and that there's a way to hold them accountable year in and year out. It's time that the new normal of people going on college campuses and assaulting our children who are there to learn just because of their religion or any other protected class stops here. And I want to thank Senator Canzoneri Fitzpatrick, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but has put this bill forward and stands behind this bill, as do I. We call on the governor, again, to take up this bill before the start of the school season, in the school session, allow for a clear line to be drawn for administrators across New York State that will hold them accountable. Hold them accountable. It's not just the fact that Dr. Sheffick resigned as president of Columbia University, although that's a good start. It's not just that. It's that should have happened a year ago when all of this happened. And she resigned not because she had another opportunity. She resigned because she realized after months of pressure that she was not up to the task. She failed miserably in protecting the students under her care, and she did not deserve to be the president of a world-renowned and well-regarded institution of higher learning. Well, we're going to do our part here in New York State. Senator Canzoneri Fitzpatrick has done her part by putting forth this bill. I'm proud to be a sponsor. I know Senator Rhoads is proud to be a sponsor, but it's time this bill passed. So to talk about this spike in harassment, attacks on Jews, whether it's in our communities or our children on college campuses, it is my pleasure to have Rabbi Dr. Ronald Sillag here to speak to the issue. Now, Rabbi Sillag is a person who is well known in the community, active when it comes to issues involving not only Israel, the hostages, very active when it comes to the organization Run for Your Lives. I'm proud to have met him through that organization and proud to have him standing with us here today. Rabbi, a few words?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning. Prior to October 7th, I never would have been standing in front of a courthouse this morning. We are all very, very well aware that since October 7th, there has been a spike in anti-Semitism of an unprecedented degree. I actually met both of the state senators for the first time, Senator Martins and Rhoads, up in Albany back in April, when they invited a group of us up to speak about the hostage crisis and raise awareness. I would like to note, neither of these two gentlemen are Jewish, yet they took the lead in fighting anti-Semitism. How many people, regardless of party, I don't care if you're Democratic, Republican, Independent, Socialist, or whatever it may be, go out of their way for people who are not ethnically, culturally their own, religiously, to help in the fight. This is a major blessing for our community, that people outside our community stand up for us. 80, 85 years ago in Europe, no one stood up for us. Not a soul. These two gentlemen, who are not members of my congregation, I promise, and I don't think they were ever in my Hebrew or religious school classes, stand up for us and speak out every day. When we speak about a mask, an individual concerned with their health wears a surgical mask. Have you seen individuals concerned about their health, other than in the higher days of COVID, wearing full face coverings or anything of that nature? No. If you go into a supermarket or somewhere today, you will see a few individuals wearing masks for health reasons, but they're wearing smaller surgical masks which just cover their nose and mouth. They are still fully identifiable. You see their eyes, you see their cheekbone structure, their ears, and if you see someone you know, you can recognize them in a surgical mask. Someone with a full face covering is not doing this for any health reason for the most part, with some extremely rare exceptions which I admit I do not know about. Very recently, 10, 11, 12 months ago, our Ring doorbell, the alert, went off about approximately 2 o'clock in the morning. There was an individual coming down the block checking car doors. Fortunately, ours didn't open. The individual moved on. A Nassau County detective showed up the next day telling us he was moving down the block looking at everyone's Ring doorbell footage, since many people have them today. I live on what used to be called a quiet residential street in old-time America. And he told us, basically, that it is going to be nearly impossible to catch the individual because their face was covered. Now, if someone's walking down my street 2 o'clock in the morning, chances are they don't belong there to begin with. The fact that they cover their face makes it a 100% guarantee. I'm guessing, and I'm not a police officer, an attorney, nor do I know too much about law enforcement, but if someone right now is walking down the street with a mask on, probably very difficult to apprehend them for anything. If they were walking down my street on the sidewalk that night, I doubt they could. I mean, what are they going to tell an officer? I'm out for my 2 a.m. stroll. I wanted to gaze at the stars. Obviously, this is necessary legislation. It was on the books, as Senator Rhoads said, for 175 years. And if not for COVID, it would still be on the books. Other than the fact that we did have COVID, there was no reason to get rid of this bill. When I was a kid growing up, who were the only people wearing masks on TV shows? Bank robbers and criminals. I never saw, other than Batman, and he concealed his identity for a different reason, the good guy wearing a mask. Unfortunately, this whole issue came to the light because of anti-Semitism, and thank God, fortunately, these two gentlemen are leading the fight to counter it and to help us in our communities. As Senator Martin said a few minutes ago, school is starting again soon. Parents are taking their kids back to colleges. Do we have any reason to believe the protests won't resume? Look what happened in front of the Nova exhibit in New York City. The Nova exhibit was an exhibit of artifacts and short videos showing on October 7th how Hamas came into Israel and what they did. It was a museum-type exhibit. Well, one day, thousands of protesters in masks decided to show up and block the entranceway. Blocking an entranceway is a crime. Standing in front of Grand Central Terminal, I don't have to be in law enforcement to know, and not allowing people to get in to go on a train is a crime. These people need to be identified. If they want to protest, I'm sure they can get a permit. I'm sure they can legally do it without disrupting the world and without hiding their identities. I thank you both for everything that you do. I thank you for letting me speak this morning. I thank you, Deputy Commissioner. As I said to you before, I have an uncle who's a retired NYPD captain, so I have full sympathy for the difficulty you have in doing the job that you do, and how unfortunately too many times today your hands are handcuffed and not allowed to do what you would like to do with the bad guys. I thank you all. Take care. God bless you. Next time I see you and speak to you again, there is a Hebrew prayer that we say called the Shehechionu prayer, if any of you are Jewish. And the ending words of the prayer are Shehechionu v'kiyamonu v'higionu bazman hazeh. We're thanking God for bringing us to a place in time. We say it for a new season, a new holiday, the first time we do something in a year. Well, hopefully the next time that I see all of you, and I have a microphone in front of me, I will be saying the Shehechionu prayer, that our hostages are home, 8 of whom are Americans, and 1 a Nassau County resident, a Plainview young man, Omer Nutra. And number 2, that common sense prevails and the legislation these two gentlemen have discussed go through. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Well said,
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. So here we are. We're proposing legislation that is long overdue. With regard to the mask legislation, it's bipartisan. Mayor Adams in New York City says he supports a ban on masks because he understands what that means for the safety and welfare of residents in New York City. Governor Hochul mentioned that she wants to ban masks in the subways for the same reason. We would just ask the governor to think a little bit more broadly and care for every New Yorker, not only those who are on the subways, those who are here in the suburbs in New York City and in every part of New York State deserve the same safety and concern. We have the ability to do it right now. The bill that was on the books for 175 years was repealed by Democrats, solely by Democrats. It was opposed by Democrats and Republicans. Unfortunately, there were more people who voted to repeal it. It should never have been repealed. It could have been suspended during COVID, and the law would have still been on the books. It's a shame that we have to ask for common sense legislation to be restored, but here we are. The ball's in the governor's court. She has the ability to call us back. She has the ability to put this on the agenda. She has the ability to protect New Yorkers, to protect our students on college campuses, and she can do it now. We're calling on her to do it. So with that, I want to thank my colleagues for being here today. I want to thank everyone who's participated. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Yes.
How do you distinguish between intent in the bill, between the intent to protect yourself, the intent to practice religious beliefs, and the intent to...
You know, there are all kinds of laws on the books right now, criminal laws on the book that deal with intent. And so we trust our law enforcement personnel, the training that they have, and frankly, common sense to distinguish between those instances where people are dangerous and people pose a danger to our communities and to our residents, and those that don't. And so it's going to be up to the individual police officers. Obviously, there are going to be objective standards. They have received training here in Nassau County, as has been mentioned many times with regard to the mask bill here in Nassau County. I expect that that same training is available everywhere else in New York State. And make no mistake, before this bill was repealed, the law was repealed in 2020, this was commonplace. We didn't hear about people being abused, that law enforcement went beyond the norm and common sense in enforcing the law. This law has been on the books and has only not been on the books for the last 4 years. Let's restore it. Let's give people confidence again that people can be held accountable, that when you're going to protest on college campuses like Columbia and the DA decides to not press charges on everyone, the reality is, part of the reason he didn't press charges is he couldn't identify who was there because they were all covering their faces. Ladies and gentlemen, remember this. If you're on a protest, if you're on a college campus, you're for protesting something, do so proudly. Don't be a coward. Don't cover your face. Show who you are. The whole point of a protest is you want people to know that you stand in opposition to whatever is going on. The fact that you have people who are quote unquote protesting, covering their faces means to me that they're there to do harm. They're there to commit crimes. And there's a reason they want to cover their face. And that reason is their reason, not ours, in terms of what we should do to protect communities and individuals who deserve the protections of the law. So I'm going to err on the side of protecting our residents. I'm going to trust law enforcement, and I'm going to stop this mad dash that we have seen over the last 4 years by Democrats attacking law enforcement, undermining the ability of law and order to continue to provide safety for our communities. This is one more step in that direction. We can fix it through this bill. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the NYCLU has come out in opposition to the county bill. They were putting in...
I saw it.
It's tying this ban to protest is infringement on the First Amendment. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I saw the report. I actually saw it in The Guardian. It's absurd. Honestly, it's pathetic. The fact that we have the New York CLU taking a law as if this were a first time that this were being enacted, forgetting for purposes of honesty and integrity that this had been on the books for years. It's this law that allowed law enforcement and civility and civil society to protect people against hate groups like the KKK. So the idea that they would provide credibility for a law that will allow people to hide their faces, whether it is extreme right or extreme left, is absurd. They should be ashamed of themselves. The fact that they would lend their credibility, such as it is, to an effort that would protect criminals who are harming, harassing, and attacking innocent students or members because of a protected class is frankly nuts. And UTS, you can quote me. Senator Rhoads?
Yeah, I did just want to add for clarification purposes. In the existing law, for example, a person would be guilty of deceptive wearing of a mask when a person being masked or disguised in unusual attire or facial alteration loiters, remains, or congregates any public place with other persons similarly masked. So we're not talking about one person walking down the street. We're not talking about somebody wearing a mask out of concern for their health and safety due to COVID. We're talking about someone engaged in protest, someone engaged in public demonstrations, in a public assembly, with other people so masked. So we're not talking about one-off. We're talking about common sense. And again, I can't stress enough, we are standing in the safest county in America. It is the safest county in America because we support in Nassau County our law enforcement. We give our law enforcement the tools that they need to be able to keep us safe, which is the primary obligation of government. And if the governor is serious, and if the Democrats in the Senate and the Assembly, the majorities, are serious about keeping the public safe, maybe you should take some cues for what we're doing here in Nassau County and listen to us to enact common sense legislation to make that possible.
Any other questions? One more.
Yeah, this is the commissioner.
Sure.
I imagine that the ACLU weighing in on this, the rank and file represent them up to civil liberties lawsuits. How do you protect the rank and file from, what are your instructions to them as far as?
So the rank and file, as expected, have been trained. All right. Seeing this law coming, we started to train. We started to train days ago, and we started to tell them what to do. All right. And the reality is, there are certain things that, I'll give you the example. All right. We started talking about it before. A guy walking down the street with a mask on at 3 o'clock in the morning with tools is probably going to generate a phone call. All right. When lights go on and bells ring and everything else, and he's suspicious, and he probably tried a couple of people's cars. That same individual at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, wearing a mask, walking down a sidewalk, going up to a residential home, he's going to be looked at. But he's probably a repairman. And when you see the truck over there. So everything is a set of circumstances that have to be looked at. We've been looking at suspicious people long before masks were enacted. And we're still looking at suspicious people. We're paid to be diligent, to be suspicious at times, all right, and to protect and serve the public. And this is the way to do it. Having a mask on under a certain set of circumstances makes it more difficult for us. So we're going to do what we can. And as again, training is ongoing, it's current, and it keeps going. All right, and if officers have a problem out in the street, they have the resources to call the supervisor, who's also been trained to help them with the decision-making process. I hope that answers your question.